Thanks for watching Agency in Motion, Health and Human Services, sponsored by KPMG. For the Government Matters Thought Leadership Network, I'm Mimi Geerges. The COVID-19 pandemic ushered in a new era for the way we approach and understand healthcare as a global community. The data generated from this pandemic alone is monumental and still growing. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services is building a framework to make faster, more accurate healthcare decisions for its patients and providers. Joining me now is Andres Colon. He is Chief Technology Architect at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Andres, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much for having me. Glad to be here.
Before your current position at CMS, you were at the White House to help with data gathering from Puerto Rico on COVID. Tell us about that experience and the challenges and complexities you faced.
Yeah, so like you said, I was at the White House as part of the United States Legal Service, where I served as an engineer supporting a couple of initiatives across the federal government. Before my time there, I was in the government of Puerto Rico. And so shortly after joining CMS during the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, I actually got called upon by my colleagues at the White House to essentially help navigate some challenges that they were having at the time with Puerto Rico, where the dashboards regarding vaccination rates was in the red, right? Things looked pretty bad. And I was surprised because I have family in Puerto Rico, and as I was calling back home, talking with friends and family, what I was actually hearing that the vaccination process was going really well, and that a lot of folks were just getting vaccinated, right? So there was a discrepancy between what my White House colleagues were seeing and what I was hearing on the ground. So I was able to reach out to the Chief Information Officer back in Puerto Rico. We all got on a call together, and we worked out, right, what was going on. And one of the major challenges was having the right infrastructure in place to be able to roll out in a timely fashion so that you could gather the information, right? And so there were questions around interfaces, data exchange, and those were resolved. And once those were resolved, one of the things that we learned was that, once the data came in, that Puerto Rico actually had, the most vaccinated, was the most vaccinated place in America, right? 2.3 million people were being vaccinated. That's 73% of the population. And so that's a great example of how, if we don't have the right infrastructure and timely data in place, we might get, wrong information for the models that we use and the dashboards that we use to make decisions.
So how would you say those experiences relate to data issues that you're currently facing at CMS?
We generate a lot of information, right? We have a lot of systems at CMS, over 250 FISMA systems. And one of the challenges is, knowing where to find data, right? Being able to catalog the information that we have. And so we've taken steps to essentially create what we call a data subway map initiative, where we're mapping where all the data silos exist. We are also working to provide quicker access to data. So we have initiatives focused around creating data meshes and data lakes, which essentially just makes accessing the information quicker, making it accessible to data scientists so that we can run reports faster as well, and reducing the time to integration. So those are all initiatives that CMS is taking on to reduce the friction in terms of accessing the data in a timely fashion.
And HHS has developed a trustworthy AI playbook. First, explain what do you mean by trustworthy AI?
Yes, so by trustworthy, what we mean is, that we're essentially designing, developing, and acquiring the use of artificial intelligence in a manner that actually foster public trust and confidence, right? Which includes, we got to protect privacy, civil rights, civil liberties, and American values. And so, and also making sure that those AI systems are consistent with applicable laws, right? And so CMS, a group of colleagues within CMS and the Department of HHS, we work together to establish a trustworthy AI playbook that we could use in navigating how to develop these services that we're developing that actually leverage AI.
And you've said that you'd like to use AI for to help reduce the burden around policy and security compliance. Break that down for us. Talk first about reducing that burden around policy.
CMS does have a lot of policy, right? And navigating that can be challenging and complex. One of the things that I've learned in my time here is that CMS is very quick in responding to policy, to changes and drafting new policies out, right? But actually going back and revisiting old policy, we're not that great at, right? And so there's also sometimes policies that can actually be adding burden, and we might not necessarily be absolutely sure about why that is, right? And so we have to engage partners, engage states and users to really understand how we can improve that. But we definitely saw an opportunity at CMS. There are colleagues within the Office of Burden Reduction and Health Informatics who are focused on trying to identify what are those areas of burden that are being introduced, and specifically using data science and AI to try to find areas of opportunity, right? So a quick example of that, very simple example, is we can have policies out there that use words of the English language that are now no longer commonly used, right? And so those are areas where we can use natural language processing and quickly identify, hey, this might be a cluster of policies that might no longer be relevant or easily understood. And so those are areas where we can target for essentially focusing on reducing burden.
And you had mentioned implementing new policy, and with every new policy, there's a time for the public to comment on that. How does AI help with getting all that data and understanding all that data?
One of the challenges that we have seen is, for example, in the pandemic, we're getting massive amounts of comments across a variety of topics. But when you're in the midst of a pandemic, being able to sort through that noise and be able to cluster comments around specific information that is very relevant at a point in time can be challenging, right? And so it became clear that the approach that we had could be significantly enhanced by leveraging artificial intelligence. So CMS has taken it as part of its goals to establish pilots and proof of concepts of essentially using AI to understand better public comments and get our folks access to the right information in a timely fashion.
We talked about reducing the burden around security compliance. So I want to ask you about that, and also about how to adopt security standards faster. How does AI work with that?
Yeah, so at CMS, we have, like I said, over 250 systems that are supporting our mission. And those have to be compliant with policies. New systems are coming online every year. And documenting your security compliance is actually a very burdensome process. And it typically happens in a silo, right? Teams are typically very private about the way that they're implementing security. And one of the challenges with that is that many times they are documenting security compliance, figuring out how to be compliant with a specific technology, without knowing that maybe other 14 teams around the agency have actually done that work already, right? And those are one of the areas where we have good data, right? We have documentation on security planning, on how you comply for certain technologies, with federal policy. And what we've done is we have applied artificial intelligence, right? Both natural language processing, supervised and unsupervised learning models, different types of approaches for AI to try to extract the technologies that CMS is using, and also extract natural compliance narratives that can actually be shared with the organization without security concerns, and therefore speeding up the time it takes to be compliant and get an authorization to be able to operate these new systems.
I want to ask you, Andres, about a specific use case at CMS, which is around the process of help desk inquiries, both internal to the organization and externally. Describe how that would work with AI.
Yes, so at CMS, we have definitely opportunities around understanding the wealth of knowledge that is out there, right? So we have users and systems that are focused around trying to get access to information quickly within the agency. So you may have a user that's trying to find who is the specific source for a policy within CMS, who's the authoritative source for something, right? And there are, there's a lot of tickets that get created within the organization to try to get help with situations like this, where, for example, some of our search engine capabilities don't meet user expectations, right? So one of the goals of the Office of Information Technology was to try to understand what were the inquiries that were happening, what would be the authoritative sources for those information, to see whether there were opportunities to reduce burden on those things. So instead of having those inquiries go to help desk, potentially we could better understand the types of questions, if there are seasonality to those questions, and try to surface the information to end users quicker, right? So that we could reduce burden on ourselves. And so there was a proof of concept and a pilot that was part of the AI Explorers program, which I'm happy to talk about. Essentially, we gave funding to take a stab at analyzing our own data. And we gathered some very interesting feedback from that process that could definitely be applied to other parts of the organization, including external inquiries that we get through help desk.
I do want to hear about the Explorers program, but first I want to talk to you about ethical AI, because it's a big topic, it's an important topic. So what initiatives are you pursuing around that? And how can you really be sure that AI isn't reinforcing human bias?
For CMS, one of the things that we've done is we are definitely getting started on artificial intelligence implementations. And ethical AI is clearly very important for public trust. So for us, we know that one of the most important aspects of proper implementation of AI is to have good data, right? And so one of the things that we focus on is making sure that as part of our principles, trustworthy AI, that the data that the algorithm will use comes from a fair and an unbiased source, that the training data is representative of the entire population, and to try to take mitigation techniques to correct any potential biases.
You know, one of your priorities at CMS focuses on the security of your software supply chain. So tell us about that and how AI is used.
Yeah, so it has implications for AI, because at the end of the day, AI is software, right? And so this software at CMS, we typically have been leveraging open source to be able to deliver quicker solutions to the public. And the challenges with open source software is that you can have vulnerabilities that are introduced through it that your developers might not typically know about, right? And part of the reason is that developers at CMS typically have a very good understanding of the open source technologies, the code they're bringing in from third parties. They know the names, they know the sources. But what happens with open source is those libraries, right, themselves have their own third-party dependencies. And, it's all the way down. There's a lot of dependencies there. And developers at CMS don't always know what vulnerabilities might be introduced through that software supply chain, right? And so one of the steps that we've taken at CMS is to establish what's called system composition analysis, essentially a best practice of scanning all of our dependencies for all of our code, checking for known vulnerabilities, and being able to remediate them in a timely fashion. And so that has implications not only for the websites we put out there and the digital services, but also for any AI that we develop.
Well, tell me about that AI Explorers program that you have at CMS.
Yeah, so at CMS, we definitely want to develop our expertise around artificial intelligence. We know that there are old problems out there at CMS for which we could apply new solutions. And so because we are still dipping our toes in artificial intelligence, we wanted to set funding so that we could try and apply AI, source ideas from across all of the organization, all the centers, and see areas of opportunity where we could essentially provide seed funding for those ideas in a very scoped and very timely experimentation. So in a scope of about 3 months, we will essentially try AI to try to solve a problem or answer questions that we have, right? And in the process of doing that, some of those can fail, right? But we can learn from those experiences, what works, what didn't, and that can help us further decide, do we want to scale this to become some form of like enterprise service or an enterprise solution? So the AI Explorers program is focused on that. And we've noticed as part of that, that we also have gaps in terms of our workforce, right? Making sure that folks are familiar with what is actually AI, what can it do for you?
I was going to ask you that. I was wondering what the biggest gaps are around knowledge of AI, and what do you spend the most time educating others about?
Well, that's a great question. So there is the knowledge gap is quite varied, right? So, some folks might not really understand what we mean by AI. Do we mean like strong AI, where systems essentially can mimic a human brain and can make decisions in a manner that is very similar to a human mind? And so it sometimes, because it's such an ambiguous term, it can lead people to think like it's sort of like a magic wand, right? That you can wave and solve solutions. And so we also have colleagues that are very much aware of what AI is and what it can do, but they might not be as familiar with some of the latest trends, some of the emerging technologies that are out there. And so part of our efforts has been to educate our colleagues, to bring in experts, and to essentially build workforce resilience around knowledge of artificial intelligence.
What are you looking for from your industry partners, Andres, when you work with them on AI systems and processes?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for us, we definitely want to build systems that are ideally impartial, that are explainable, accountable, reliable, that preserve privacy, and also that are secure, right? And all of those are ideal, right? For us, when we're working with partners, we want to bring in partners that truly understand the capabilities, right, that AI can bring to CMS. And we also want AI systems that are, like, we can understand what is happening behind the scenes, right? That we can understand why the AI is making certain decisions, that we can potentially review code as well where needed, that they are addressing biases in the data. And so as we're looking for vendor partners, we are engaging with many different folks in industry to try to make sure that we can both experiment and try out in a safe fashion, applying AI at the agency, but also that we are able to have trustworthy AI coming in from these vendor partners.
But Andres, how do you achieve that transparency into that code while also protecting the intellectual property of your industry partners?
So that is a pickle, right? And I think we work with our vendor partners to find the sweet spot on these things. I think as CMS explores more and the federal government becomes more adept at applying artificial intelligence, we will learn more around like how should we word procurement documents so that it's very clear what we can protect intellectual property, but we can also make sure that we have transparency and that these systems are actually can be held accountable, right? Like and are reliable. So there are ways that we can implement AI systems. I think personally at CMS, most of the implementations that we're doing are leveraging open source technologies. And so we are also being able to review code from our colleagues, vendor partners that are implementing systems, and access to, like I said, making sure that the data is good and they can prove that it's good, that it's not biased, and that we can review code where possible as well.
All right, Andres, thanks so much for being with us, and appreciate you being on the program. Up next, what health agencies should be paying attention to. A veteran of the HHS weighs in.
Agency in Motion, HHS, is sponsored by KPMG. Learn more at read.kpmg.us/modgov.
Welcome back to Agency in Motion, Health and Human Services, sponsored by KPMG. I'm Mimi Geerges with the Government Matters Thought Leadership Network. Within the Department of Health and Human Services, efforts are underway to leverage the volumes of healthcare information using artificial intelligence to better predict patient outcomes. In this segment, we'll explore how HHS and its agencies can ensure that the use of AI solutions are trustworthy, equitable, and secure. I'm back with Mike Peckham. He's Federal Advisory Managing Director for KPMG with over a decade of management experience at HHS. Mike, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you, Mimi. It's a pleasure to be here.
So you just heard Andres talking about how he's using AI at CMS. He also talked a lot about access to data and the quality of that data. What are your thoughts on that?
So I thought those were incredible points because starting with access to data within the federal government, that's always difficult. You have access to the data within an arm's reach, but after an arm's reach, it's very hard. But then you have to start thinking about what's the quality of the data that I'm working with. And the quality of the data means everything. I used to work with a guy, and he would always say, data is king. And I absolutely agree with that. But if you can't ingest the data, consume the data, and display the data in a meaningful manner, then it's useless. And that is key to the quality and the access.
You recently left government service at HHS. I wonder what the data lessons were from the initial COVID response.
The geo-tracking. We have learned how much AI has helped in tracking through contact tracing. Where were the outbreaks and where are the next outbreaks going to be? Now, this is all hindsight. This is all 2020 at this point in time. But it's putting some really cool tools to use for the proper outcomes. And now, if we're taking that as a lesson learned, the next time something like this goes on, let's say monkeypox, we have a better way of forecasting where things are going.
You know, you talked about the data quality being important, but this was a pandemic on a global scale. So is there a way to standardize the data? I mean, we're dealing with different, not just different localities within the United States, but different countries, different international organizations.
So I always did a lot of work around the Data Act, also did a lot of work around AI and tools and those things. I always looked at it from a perspective of normalizing data as opposed to standardizing the data. So normalize first, understand what the data is that you want, how you're going to present that data, and what is the wealth or the treasure trove of data that you want to present using a singular term. It's not always one for one. And I learned that from good friends over at the SEC when they were doing their XBRL reporting. So start with, let's understand what the standard term is that we want to report on. Let's come up with the normalization tools to what are the aliases for that term, and then we can start to spread that out and garner some really good information for reporting.
You point to the vaccine as an opportunity to capture unbiased data. Explain that.
So I loved when I went to get my vaccination. Sat down and started filling out forms. If you know me, I'm not a big fan of filling out forms. But there was one question on there, and the question was, who's your insurance provider? And I was like, why are they asking for my insurance provider? I'm sure this is covered under all the CARES Act money and everything else. Then it dawned on me. They were trying to gather information, not just about me, but am I insured? Where do I live? And who are the people who are coming who are uninsured? Where do they live? And maybe we can start to look at a different tactic or approach to the uninsured across the United States. It was something that basically had no bias involved, and it gave a lot of information to the user of the data.
You mentioned bias, so we do need to talk about how to eliminate that bias. I mean, humans are naturally biased. How do we make sure that AI isn't perpetuating that?
There are different ways of doing it. I think probably the coolest way that I learned recently from a KPMG colleague, synthetic data. So if you have a lot of data and you're using that data to create the algorithms, if you want to tweak the algorithms, and I say tweak the algorithms for good, to reduce the biases, you can introduce slight little deviations through synthetic data, train your algorithms so that you can have better outcomes. Look at the idea of biometrics. Biometrics have been used, and for people of color, they have not been coming out in glowing or positive results. Now, that's based on the algorithms and how the algorithms were trained. If we start to introduce differences in skin tone and eye color and things like that within the synthetic data, we can fully or more robustly train the data and hopefully remove a lot of those biases.
You know, I want to ask you about when federal agencies are looking to get started with their AI and AI management. what do you recommend to them? What are some of the common pitfalls that they should avoid?
I would say the first thing is start your journey. Take a leap of faith and do it. We call it emerging technology, but these technologies have been around for a long time. Machine learning, natural language processing, robotics process automation. Start your journey, and I would highly recommend you do it with a partner. I've learned so much from my partners within KPMG, and I know that we want to partner with government officials to share that knowledge so that you don't fall into the pitfalls of other mistakes that have been made before. And if you take the approach of we are going to make some mistakes, but we're going to course correct through an agile approach as we go through the process, you're going to be fine. And you're going to be way better off as soon as you see that first win.
You know, in the previous segment, Andres mentioned the need for transparency into AI to make sure that it's explainable, to make sure that it's reliable. What are your thoughts on that, especially given the industry perspective of protecting that code as intellectual property?
So it's pretty basic. We're talking algorithms here. The key to it is what are the data sources, where are you getting the data sources, and how are you using it? The algorithms, anybody's going to be able to figure out what it is that you're doing with them. So while they're proprietary in nature, I think we're going to have to learn to live with the idea that we have to open up our books a little bit and share what those algorithms are so that auditors, the public, when you're talking about government data, can go through and they can test and they can challenge. We took an approach when I was at HHS that everything that we did in a system that I was building, we had a transparency factor to it. So you could always go in and you could always look at what is the data, where is it coming from, and how fresh is the data. And if you don't trust the data, we told people exactly, here's how you go find that data, and here's how you can test it for yourself.
You know, you have both the government perspective, you have an industry perspective. I wonder what's missing in that partnership between government and industry that's going to benefit the American public.
I think it's building greater trust that I will say from a KPMG perspective, we're there to help. We want to see good coming out of the government. We're taxpayers like everybody else. And if we can help with a lot of resources, I think that we could certainly build a better foundation for the future of where we're going with all of this, artificial intelligence, whatever it is that you want to talk about. I was excited to learn when I got to KPMG that we have ignition centers, and there are these really cool areas where you can go and you can ideate and you can build wireframes. You just have to walk in with a use case or a problem that you're trying to solve, something that's tangible that we can really sit down and go through. Using human-centered design, we can get to the foundation and basis of what it is, and we can help in so many different ways. There's a huge advantage to having that partnership, and I hope that we can build the trust between both the communities and be better off for it.
And you also recommend that there be reflection points every so often.
Probably one of the most important items. I've often said that I've learned way more from my failures in my career than I've learned from successes. You lose sleep over failures. If you're going to go through a process or a project and you're not going to take time to say, okay, what did we do really well and what did we do very poorly? And document that information, but don't just stick it in a drawer. Save it and use it from the perspective of this is going to enable you to do a better job the next time around. So make sure that this isn't a failure that's buried in a drawer that nobody ever wants to talk about again. And I've seen many of those. It's a failure. Last I checked, 70% of IT projects in the federal government were failing. The last I checked, we've got a lot of them. But that means there are a lot of lessons learned. So rather than starting from scratch, the next time you're going to approach a problem or somewhere problem, go back, double check what happened the last time so you're not starting from ground zero.
All right, Mike, thanks so much for being on the program. Nice to see you.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching Agency in Motion, Health and Human Services, sponsored by KPMG. This is the latest installment of our Agency in Motion series. For more information on the subject matter we discussed today, go to govmatters.tv/AIM and scroll down to HHS. For the Government Matters Thought Leadership Network, I'm Mimi Geerges.